The office was winding down fast, lights switching off one by one, chairs pushed under desks, the low hum of computers fading into silence, when Emma Carter saw the message pop up on her screen asking her to come to her boss's office before leaving. And even though it was just a short sentence, it made her stomach tighten because Daniel Harris never asked anyone to stay late without a clear reason. And as she stood, gathered her bag, and walked down the quiet hallway, her mind moved faster than her feet, replaying every task she had touched that week, every email she had sent, every meeting she had spoken in, wondering if she had missed something important or misunderstood an instruction. And when she reached his door, slightly open with warm light spilling out, she paused just long enough to steady herself before stepping inside, noticing how different the room felt without the usual daytime noise, how the city lights outside the window seemed closer, more personal, and how Daniel himself looked different too, standing by the glass with his jacket off and his tie loosened, not like the distant, polished manager she knew during office hours but like someone carrying a quiet weight. And when he turned and asked her to sit, his voice calm but serious, she felt a strange pull in her chest that she couldn't explain, because there had always been something between them that lived in small moments, a shared look during meetings, a pause before he spoke her name, the way he listened to her ideas like they mattered more than the room, but it had never crossed into words, and Emma had trained herself not to notice it, to keep things simple and safe. Yet now, sitting across from him in the stillness of early evening, she felt exposed, as if the walls were listening. And when he told her gently that this wasn't about her work and that she was valued, relief washed over her only to be replaced by confusion, because people didn't call private meetings just to give reassurance. And as he hesitated, looking down at his desk, choosing his words carefully, Emma sensed that whatever he was about to say had been held back for a long time, something planned but delayed. And when he finally spoke about a new opportunity, a job in another city, one that meant leaving the company, the floor seemed to shift beneath her even though she had no logical reason to feel shaken. Yet the thought of him not being there, not walking past her desk, not offering quiet encouragement during stressful days, felt like a door closing on something she hadn't realized she depended on. And as he explained that he would be leaving soon and that he wanted her to hear it from him first, his honesty only made the moment heavier. Because there was care in that choice, and care always carried meaning. And when he admitted there was more he needed to say, his voice lower now, Emma felt time stretch thin, every sound sharper, every breath louder. And as he spoke about holding back, about confusing feelings with professionalism, about choosing silence because it was easier and safer, she understood before he said it outright, her heart already racing, because she had lived the same quiet struggle, telling herself that admiration was harmless and attraction was just imagination. And when he finally said that meeting her had changed him and that he couldn't leave without telling her the truth, Emma felt both seen and unsteady, standing at the edge of a moment she had never allowed herself to imagine, realizing that this simple request to come into his office before closing wasn't about work at all but about a truth that had been waiting patiently for the right moment. And as the city lights blinked outside and the office fell completely silent, she knew that whatever happened next, her life had already shifted in a way she could never undo. Daniel's office felt smaller now, the quiet hum of the city below pressing in through the large windows as Emma sat across from him, unsure how to respond to the weight in his eyes, because he had just admitted he was leaving for a new job in another city, Seattle, a promotion he couldn't refuse. And although she smiled and congratulated him, the words felt hollow in her chest as a strange mix of relief and dread coursed through her, knowing the routine they had shared. The morning greetings, the small chats at the coffee machine, the unspoken support during deadlines, would soon disappear. And then, with a pause that made her lean forward without realizing it, Daniel leaned back in his chair and looked at his hands as if summoning courage, his voice dropping just enough that she had to listen closely, saying that the reason he called her wasn't just about the move or the promotion, that what he was about to say had been kept in silence for far too long. And as he spoke slowly, each word deliberate, confessing that he had tried to ignore his feelings, telling himself it was just respect, admiration, or nothing at all, Emma felt her stomach tighten because she understood exactly what he meant, how careful glances and shared smiles could grow into something more, and how impossible it was to ignore that pull when it existed quietly between two people who spent their days side by side. and when Daniel admitted that he couldn't leave without being honest, that he would regret it for the rest of his life if he walked away without saying how much she mattered to him, Emma's heart pounded in a way she hadn't felt in years, caught between excitement and fear, because here was the man she admired, the one she trusted and respected, telling her that her presence had changed him, and the honesty in his voice made her feel raw, exposed, yet deeply connected, the kind of connection that words alone couldn't fully explain. And as she sat there, frozen and listening, she noticed subtle details, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the faint tilt of his head, the calm steadiness of his hands on the desk, that made the confession feel real, intimate, and safe all at once. And she realized that this wasn't about work, about deadlines or meetings, about promotions or responsibilities. It was about something far more fragile and precious, something that had grown quietly over months and years of shared moments, unacknowledged until now. And when Daniel finally looked directly at her, voice low but steady, telling her that she wasn't imagining their connection, that what they felt was real and mattered more than either of them had admitted, Emma felt a rush of relief, mixed with longing, because the truth she had feared might be one-sided was instead mirrored, and she couldn't help but think of every subtle moment, every pause, every careful choice that had made her heart beat faster without warning, and how all of it had led to this confession in the quiet office, late in the evening, where nothing could interrupt or dilute the meaning. And even as the clock ticked loudly on the wall, she realized that this revelation had shifted something fundamental, that the room, the city outside, and even the air itself felt charged with possibility, and though Daniel didn't ask her for anything more than her understanding, Emma felt herself leaning forward in her chair, drawn to the honesty he offered, knowing that whatever happened next, whether it was a shared acknowledgement or a careful distance maintained, this moment had already changed the way she saw him, and herself, and the world they shared, because sometimes the hardest words to speak were the ones that opened doors to entirely new lives, and tonight, in the quiet glow of his office, that door had been cracked open, leaving Emma suspended between fear and hope, caught in the rush of emotion that comes when two hearts finally acknowledge what has always been there, and she knew she could never unhear his confession, could never return to the same easy routine without feeling the tug of what was possible. And as Daniel's eyes held hers, steady, honest, and vulnerable, Emma understood that the evening had already rewritten her story, leaving her breathless, aware, and unready to leave, even as the city outside carried on in its usual rhythm, unaware of the small, profound change happening in a quiet office high above the streets, where truth had finally been spoken and nothing would ever feel quite the same again. Emma felt her heart racing as she sat across from Daniel, the weight of his confession settling around them like a quiet storm, and for the first time, the office felt both safe and electric, a place where time had slowed just enough for her thoughts to catch up with reality, because she had spent months, maybe years, carefully keeping her feelings in check, telling herself that admiration and respect were enough, that longing was dangerous, that crossing unspoken lines could ruin everything. And yet here he was, opening a door she had secretly hoped for but never allowed herself to knock on, and as she searched his face, seeing the mix of vulnerability and sincerity there, she realized she wasn't alone in this complicated emotion. That the tension, the quiet glances, the small gestures that had seemed accidental over time were all evidence of something mutual, something neither of them could pretend was insignificant any longer. And when she finally spoke, her voice low and unsteady, admitting that she felt the same but had hidden it under layers of professionalism and fear, Daniel's eyes widened slightly, not in surprise, but in relief, because her words confirmed what he had dared to hope, and the room seemed to hold its breath with them, suspended between confession and the next step. And though she tried to keep her tone casual, to make it seem like a simple acknowledgement, she couldn't hide the tremor of excitement and uncertainty, knowing that what they were sharing was rare, fragile, and deeply human. And as she continued, explaining that she had never wanted to complicate his life, never wanted to cross boundaries that couldn't be uncrossed, Daniel listened without interrupting, giving her space to speak, which made her feel more understood than she had in years, because true connection isn't just about admission, it's about listening, patience, and mutual respect. And when he finally responded, leaning back slightly but still keeping his gaze on her, he reassured her that he wasn't asking for anything that would make her uncomfortable, that he only needed her to hear his truth before he left. And Emma felt the weight of his honesty pressing gently on her heart, reminding her that love and attraction can be terrifying but also transformative, and as the seconds stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotion, she realized that their connection had shifted something fundamental. That it wasn't just a fleeting feeling but a recognition of compatibility, respect, and shared longing, and when she admitted, almost in a whisper, that she had feared she was imagining things, Daniel's soft confirmation made her chest tighten, because it validated her own suppressed emotions. Turning months of quiet observation and subtle acknowledgement into a reality she could finally confront, and as the clock ticked on and the office lights cast long shadows across the floor, Emma felt the intensity of their unspoken bond. The thrill and fear of vulnerability, the weight of possibility, and the subtle awareness that this moment could not be undone, that the choice to speak, to acknowledge, to accept the truth, had already set a new course for both their lives, and though no promises were made, and though the path ahead remained uncertain, she understood that honesty had a power all its own, capable of changing hearts and futures without a single dramatic gesture. And as she rose to leave, legs unsteady but spirit alert, Daniel's final words, telling her that meeting her had changed him, lingered in the air like a promise, making her realize that their lives were now intertwined in ways that would demand courage, reflection, and possibly a leap of faith, and the quiet click of the door behind her felt less like an ending and more like a threshold, a passage into a world where emotion, truth, and longing could finally exist openly, where two people could choose to face the unknown together, and where Emma knew, with sudden clarity, that nothing about her life would ever be the same again. The next morning, Emma arrived at the office earlier than usual, her mind racing with every word Daniel had said the night before, unable to shake the mixture of excitement, fear, and hope that had settled deep in her chest, and as she walked past the empty desks and the soft hum of computers booting up, she felt a strange sense of purpose, knowing that today would be different, that what had been left unsaid in the quiet office hours before closing could no longer remain hidden, and when she reached Daniel's office, she found him already there, carefully packing books into a box, the sunlight from the tall windows catching the edges of his suit and highlighting the slight tension in his shoulders, and as he looked up and offered her a small, genuine smile, Emma felt a flutter in her chest, a quiet recognition that neither of them could ignore the night's conversation, and closing the door behind her, she stepped in fully, aware that this would be the moment where everything they had felt quietly for so long would either move forward or remain suspended, and she began carefully, choosing her words with the same honesty he had shown her, explaining that she had thought about what he said, about her own feelings, about the life she had built and the paths she had carefully followed, and that she realized she couldn't go on wondering what might have been if she ignored her own heart, and Daniel listened intently, his eyes soft but steady, as she admitted that she wanted to approach whatever possibility existed between them honestly, not as boss and employee, not as coworkers or colleagues constrained by routine, but as two people who recognized the value of truth and connection, and she emphasized that she wasn't asking him to make promises, to uproot his life or follow her blindly, only that once he left, they could explore the reality of what they felt, freely and openly, and Daniel's expression shifted, a quiet relief and gratitude appearing across his face, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, because Emma's words were exactly what he had hoped to hear, and in that moment, the air in the office seemed charged with possibility, the quiet sounds of the city below blending with the soft rhythm of their breathing, creating a space that felt both intimate and safe, and though they didn't reach across the desk, didn't need to touch to make the connection real, the mutual understanding between them was palpable, a silent agreement that honesty, courage, and recognition of feelings had already altered the course of their lives, and as Emma turned to leave, her steps lighter than when she arrived, she knew that this evening before closing, the confession, the shared truth, and the careful acknowledgement of their emotions had not only changed their relationship but had rewritten the possibilities of her future, opening a door to something beautiful and uncharted, something built on respect, honesty, and the quiet, profound certainty that choosing to face emotions rather than hide from them could transform ordinary days into extraordinary beginnings. And as the office lights flickered on for the day and colleagues began to arrive, Emma carried with her a sense of hope and anticipation, knowing that what had begun as a late evening conversation had already reshaped her heart, her perspective, and her life, leaving her with the thrilling understanding that real change often begins in moments of courage, spoken softly, felt deeply, and embraced without fear. And that from now on, every step she took in the office, every glance exchanged, every quiet interaction could be the start of something genuine, tender, and lasting, because they had both chosen honesty over silence, connection over distance, and the chance for love over the safety of routine. And Emma walked back to her desk with a steady heart, a bright mind, and the exhilarating knowledge that life had just taken a turn towards something profoundly meaningful, something worth embracing fully, without hesitation, and that the evening before closing, the words spoken, and the feelings acknowledged had changed everything in ways neither of them could have anticipated but both deeply needed.